Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man plays a game that he regrets he ever downloaded. So, by any means necessary, don't play Hatchman Cove.
At first, I wrote this entire post as a way to get people to uninstall and remove the game Hatchman Cove from their Steam accounts, but I soon realized pretty much no one has ever played it. But if you by any chance happen to own a copy, please, I urge you, remove it. Uninstall and forget it. Don't look back. Don't touch it ever again. I'll tell you why. A friend of mine bought a 3-pack of Hatchman Cove back in 2009. It was a multiplayer game where 3 people are paired up against a single strong player on the opposite team. Kind of like an early Dead by Daylight game. This game might very well be a spiritual predecessor. The similarities between those games are pretty eerie. I'm sure at least one person on the Dead by Daylight team has a Steam copy of Hatchman Cove, and that kind of worries me. See, Hatchman Cove was this game where you played in cycles, kind of like a red light, green light game. 3 people play as survivors from a ship that crashed into the cove, and a 4th player gets to play as the killer. The killer wasn't necessarily some slasher with an axe. It could be a vengeful angel, a grim reaper, or several other kinds of killer. At least that was the original plan. So the game would alter between having bright lights all over the map going on and off. While they were on, the killer would notice any kind of movement with a ping. When the lights were off, survivors could move any way they want as long as they didn't draw too much attention. They could set up traps to delay the killer or sabotage the lights to get more time. The killer, on the other hand, was to grab the survivors and drown them in a well at the center of the map. Once a survivor was grabbed, the other survivors are given a choice to either try and intercept the killer using traps or use the time to gain an advantage. The problem was that Hatchman Cove didn't sell very well. The developers had some legal trouble with their publisher, who were pissed about the developers backing out of an exclusive deal with OnLive. Check it, it's on Wikipedia. There was no promotion on Steam or anywhere else, as the publishers didn't want it released on another platform. They didn't want it released at all for another 6 months until the game had the proper infrastructure. The devs screwed up and published it on Steam anyway, and the whole thing was a mess. Still, during the months that it was active, there was a fairly regular player base. My friends and I played it pretty much every day for about a month. I mained Sturgis as a survivor, the Norwegian fisherman who could lure the killer using his fishing rod. As a killer, there were only 2 options at the time, the Hatchetman and the Blameless. I preferred to play the Hatchetman. He was straightforward. You got a hatchet, could destroy shelters, and had a certain resistance to traps. The Blameless, she was just weird. They never managed to balance her right. The Blameless was an old woman. She was slow, but she floated around the map and avoided all ground-based traps. She always had this warm smile, and her passive ability was just the weirdest. If she was far away, she would look like a random ally on your team. Only when she got closer would she reveal that sinister, smiling face. Hatchetman was just a murderer, but the Blameless was downright creepy. But the game didn't get any updates because of the legal battle. No updates, no new survivors, no killers, nothing. Instead, the game went silent. We stopped playing, and a few months later, the game was unceremoniously unlisted and removed from the Steam store, without as much as an apology. I uninstalled Hatchman Cove and didn't think about it for years. Just one of those games that rest in the back catalog. I forgot I even had it. But this is where things get weird. Last December, I was gifted the new Harvest Moon game as a Christmas present, and some primal part of my reptile brain clicked back in on Hatchman Cove. The friends I used to play with had moved on with their lives, but the game still had a Steam community page. I checked the store page, and it was empty. The game couldn't be found on Google either. The game was completely hidden. If you don't actually have it in your library, you won't find it without a direct link. That in itself is kind of weird. Most abandoned games can still be Googled. But Hatchman Cove still had a very, very active community. There were plenty of discussions on the forums, but they didn't make any sense. Their speech was almost garbled. I'm sure whatever they discussed made sense to them, but to an outsider, it seemed like nonsense. A few examples. Topic. How much GW to finish no min? I want to finish no min, I don't know yet. Just don't GW then. Get your shit together. You'll never go min if you don't GW, just commit. The discussion forum is just a mess. The example above was the most legible thing I could find, and I still have no idea what it says. So I started checking out the community content like videos and screenshots. The way the community played the game was completely different from when I played. Pretty much no one played Hatchetman anymore. The killer seemed limited to the blameless. Not a single screenshot of the Hatchetman, just the blameless. But the weirdest thing was how players interacted with the killer. Instead of hiding, they come running up to her. They run up to her with their microphones on, screaming at her. Screaming, begging, pleading for her to kill them. Not with funny voices or anything, no. There were people crying in chat. Videos marked with GW, and various dates littered the community page, each with people crying and screaming and begging to die. The volume maxed out immediately, and most of the time, all voices were nothing but a crackling mess that could easily blow out your speakers. I couldn't stop watching. I'd never seen anything like it, not even back in the days when I was still playing. That wasn't the way you played the game. No one was hiding or looking for objectives. I'd see players using my old main Sturgis and just rush the blameless as soon as the match started. Seeing the 3D model of the old bearded man running up to the blameless, pleading to die, that was uncomfortable. I made the mistake of posting my own question on the discussion forum. I was just too curious. You have to remember, at this point, this was still just a weird blip in my Steam library. I made my own topic and just asked, what the hell happened to the game? I got no responses in a week. Nothing. After that, things have gotten weird. Real weird. It started with CSGO. One night, a teammate came on and just started screaming. No big deal at first, just another troll, but he was screaming at me, specifically. Screaming at me, begging me to shoot him. There was crime. He was desperate, asking me to please team kill him. He offered to send me money, trade rare skins, whatever I wanted. He got kicked before I even knew what to say. 2 games later, the same guy joins my team with a different username and clan tag. He keeps screaming, crying, and begging. My teammates laughed, but I was getting uncomfortable. I stopped playing. Hearing a grown man barely being able to breathe between sobs is just too much. That wasn't a prank, that was desperation. But it didn't stop there. From that point on, in several games, people started joining and begging me to kill them. It could be by text, in Steam, chat, by voice, whatever they could. Once in Fall Guys, there were 2 people with the usernames Kill Me and Kill Me Too. How? You can't even pick your own username in Fall Guys. They just stood there, waiting for me to push them over the edge. These colorful little blob people just made my stomach crawl, because I knew that whoever controlled them were sitting there, screaming in a complete panic behind the screen. It just kept going. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I used to have the setting to hear and be heard by everyone enabled, but I had to stop. Naked users came running at me while I was camping out at Strawberry, and I turned off all audio as soon as I saw them. I was shaking as I realized the mute setting didn't work, and I force-closed my game. I swear, for a few seconds after the executable had closed, I could still hear them. I threw my headphones across the room and walked away from the computer, just holding my head and quivering. I didn't know what to do. I could barely be at my computer. I went back to the Hatchman Cove Steam forums and just started reporting people. I also reported all videos to YouTube, and I just flagged everything. I know I abused the report system, but things were getting out of hand. I was being harassed. So they took it down. Not just the forums or the videos, but everything. The entire Steam page. Gone, including the community page. I could still see the name Hatchman Cove in my library at that point, but nothing showed up when I clicked it. YouTube and Steam probably didn't care much and didn't bother to do a review of my reports. It was easier to just pull the plug. And for a while that did the trick. I actually got back on CSGO. Then it got worse than ever. Random people started joining our Discord server, just screaming into our ears. No matter how many times we banned them or muted them, they just kept coming back. My friends noticed that as long as I was offline, their voices stayed away. so my server figured I was playing a prank or something. At first they thought it was kind of funny, but the more it happened, the more they were getting frustrated. Some were getting scared and sent me private messages asking me to please, as friends, stop. Today I'm permabanned. I can't even log back onto Discord without getting messages from random accounts begging me to come online and kill them. It has gotten to the point where I've uninstalled pretty much everything. I don't even have Skype. I don't play games anymore, and I don't think I'll be browsing Reddit much longer either, since I've started getting messages here too. Not just here, but on my phone as well. Texts in the middle of the night, random calls from unknown numbers. Last week I found traces of handprints on my kitchen window. Not just one or two, but dozens. A neighbor told me there'd been someone shouting outside my door when I was out buying groceries the other day. I'm considering calling the police, but I don't know what to say. I don't even know if I'm in danger. I can't get the bland face of the blameless out of my head. I dream of her asking me without moving her crinkled old mouth if I want it all to stop, and I say yes. I go to her, dressed as old Sturgis, standing alongside the others with my fishing rod. First, I ask her to end it all, but the others speak louder and she can't hear me. Then I ask again, trying to speak over the others. Soon I find myself screaming. We all scream, louder and louder, begging, pleading, crying for her attention. We all want it to stop, and she refuses to oblige. Instead, she just smiles, holding some sort of beautiful secret behind her pixelated dead eyes. I don't know what it is, but I want it. I'm starting to understand, but at the same time, I'm disgusted. Please, stay away from Hatchman Cove.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a woman moving into a new place gets more than she bargained for, when her reality becomes surreal. So I don't know how I found it, because it came from my wallpaper.
I got a job in San Diego not too long after the pandemic settled. It was an exciting time, but I was also anxious about finding a place to live. I didn't have that much saved up, so I had to find somewhere a bit more lenient to newcomers. I signed up to all kinds of lists and tenant groups, but most leads were dead in the water. The only places within my price range had a no pets policy, and I couldn't bring myself to rehome my cat Marmalade. Poor thing was just a year old and a complete mama's girl. After weeks of searching, I stumbled upon a landlord with a vacant spot. He hadn't even got the time to list it. All I'd seen was a post about a cheap apartment. I messaged him spontaneously and asked about it. Turns out the previous tenant had passed away. It was on the 4th floor, not too far off Main Street, and surprisingly cheap. Cat-friendly, too. He offered me a deal. If I paid for the cleanup crew, the place was mine. I couldn't say no. Once the place was cleaned up, I met up with my new landlord and got the keys handed to me. My new place was on the top floor of this beautiful old building, made somewhere back in the 50s. Cool, stone-tiled floors, spacious ceiling, and plenty of sunlight coming in from the body-sized windows. There was a sort of French balcony with a little space to smoke, or a mini garden. There was a large living room area, a tiny kitchenette, and a cramped little bedroom on the sunny side. It wasn't much, but I could see myself growing attached to it. You could tell it was old, though. There were all kinds of little quirks. A lock that you had to jiggle, pipes that rumbled a little whenever you took a shower, and you could immediately tell if one of your neighbors were smoking because of the shitty ventilation. It was far from perfect, but for that price, at that location, I couldn't ask for a better deal. The one thing that dated it more than anything else, however, was the strange 70s wallpaper. This intricate floral pattern covered most of the living room, along with the western wall of the bedroom. A dark gray base color with lines of white. Roses, tulips, sunflowers, all in variations of silver and blue. It was beautiful, in a sort of primitive Art Deco kind of way, but you could tell it was old. I promised myself to get it replaced if I were to live there long term. It didn't take long to move in. I didn't have much in the way of furniture, and I didn't really have the money to bring in something new. I figured I'd settle for what little I had for the time being, instead focusing on getting used to my new job. I was working as a full-time consultant for a telecom company, mostly focusing on process management and evaluation. Might not sound that interesting, but you get a lot of wiggle room to really switch things up for the better. Post-pandemic, we were on a routine of a single weekly meeting, and the rest could and would be done from our home office. It felt kind of dumb to force people to come in once a week just because, but if I wanted the job, that was the deal. Marmalade got settled in that place long before I did. She found a sunny spot next to one of the big windows. I set up a cozy basket for her to snuggle into. I, on the other hand, was having trouble sleeping those first few nights. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling. I'd lose myself in that view. Sort of like when you're looking down into dark waters. You can't really see where it ends. It is just this perpetual nothing. And you can imagine it continuing forever. That first week went by in a flash. I had my first meeting and got my first assignment. Process assessment at one of the branch offices in Pittsburgh. Long distance, with an in-person evaluation at the end of a 2-month cycle. Nothing I couldn't handle, but said office had a sort of reputation for being unmanageable. It was the kind of assignment you throw at someone to see if they got the chops for it long term. That first day was mostly meet and greets, with a tiny afterwork at one of the chic downtown bars. It was mostly an excuse to crack a few cold ones on a Monday. My new colleagues were a few decibels louder than I was used to, so I ended up sitting mostly in the background, learning to appreciate a small labeled dark pumpkin ale. The next day, I was in full work mode. I set up my laptop with a view of my awful wallpaper to make it look a bit more office-like. Marmalade wasn't moving from her new favorite spot by the window, so there were no fluffy tails in the way of my webcam. I had a long talk with the branch manager, along with a few technicians, to just sort of dip my toe in the water. They were all courteous enough, but I could tell they'd been through the ringer a couple of times. This wasn't their first assessment, and it wouldn't be their last. By the end of the day, I was talking with one of the salesmen, a woman named Deirdre. At that point, I'd been in constant Zoom calls for over 4 hours, and my voice was giving out. Deirdre could tell I was exhausted, and we ended up just talking about other things instead. My apartment, my job, my cat. I had to bother Marmalade a bit just to show her off. Deirdre showed off her own feline companion, a 3-year-old ragdoll named Popeye. Ironically, that call ended up being my longest, but it went by the fastest. Deirdre was a gem. I spent most of my time setting up questionnaires and mapping out the overall structure. I was in daily calls, bouncing emails all the way down the supply chain, trying to get a clear picture of the main issues. It was the same old story that I'd heard 100 times before. Management blaming the salesman blaming the warehouse, and the warehouse blaming the technicians. There were little hitches all the way down the road, ranging from dated inventory systems to useless red tape. After the first few days, I started getting into a routine. Ping-ponging between meetings and Excel spreadsheets, Marmalade and I made that apartment into a proper home. Chinese takeout boxes started lining the kitchenette, and I had a few extra talks with Deirdre just to pass the slow hours. I started getting used to that place, even the awful wallpaper. I stopped hearing the rumbling pipes after a while, and the cigarette smoke from the neighbors slowly blended into the background smells. I stopped waking from cars passing on the streets below, and my first paycheck went into making the living room look like something that could actually be lived in. I remember one night when I was working overtime. I got a late email about submitting a progress report, so I had to stay up making a presentation. I found myself by the opinion that this was looking more and more like a management issue. Who the hell sends that kind of email at 4:50 p.m. on a Thursday, expecting it to be done before lunch the next day? Unbelievable. I was done by about 10 p.m. when I shambled away from my laptop. I picked up a can of cat food for Marmalade and walked over to her favorite window. Only she wasn't there. Her bed was still there, but Marmalade had moved to another window. Still sleeping soundly, but she'd found a new favorite spot. It felt strange in a way, like the entire apartment had shifted a little. Looking up at the wallpaper, I could have sworn the patterns had moved. It looked identical, just a bit off. I could have sworn it was different, despite looking exactly same. It was a strange feeling. Everything felt familiar, but that one little twist made it feel like a new room. I was starting to doubt myself. When looking at Marmalade out of her basket, however, it was clear that something was different, in some way. The next few days, I started to notice this shift in new ways. The walls would look different at night. Where at one point I'd see a sunflower, I'd see a rose the next day. Then again, I wasn't ever really sure, and I chalked it up to me just not paying attention. Marmalade would move from spot to spot, never really sure what her favorite ever was. One night she couldn't settle in at all, instead moving from one window to the next, meowing at me anxiously. That night, as I lay awake, I had my eyes firmly fixed on the wall. I could imagine the patterns moving on their own, the many flowers gently swaying to an invisible wind. It was just that kind of unreal, surrealist thought you catch just before you fall asleep. But in that moment, I could have sworn it was real. Living, even. As I closed my eyes, I imagined the dark gray background color to be as deep as an ocean. A darkness stretching into a distant nothing. The next day, as I was making my morning coffee, I noticed something peculiar. I stepped on a dry blue petal. I couldn't explain where it came from. I had no flowers in my apartment, and the ventilation was so shit that it could barely rotate air. Flower petals were out of the question. Marmalade played with it for a while, and I convinced myself that it was just something I dragged in. Still, it reminded me of a flower petal from the blue roses on the wallpaper. It made me anxious, but I couldn't figure out why. What was I even worried about? I couldn't let that thought go for the rest of the day. That I was missing something obvious, or maybe that there really was something to my strange paranoia. So at the end of the day, when I talked to Deirdre, I brought it up. I explained that there was just something inherently creepy about living there, like an uncomfortable thought tickling your neck when you're not looking. Deirdre tried to reassure me, her chuckle coming through my headphones.
It takes time, love,
She said.
You just got here. Besides, everything looks strange in the dark.
Yeah, I just can't shake the feeling, you know? I explained. Like there's something more to it?
Like what?
I didn't know what to answer. As I stepped into the living room, I noticed Marmalade rolling on the living room carpet, casually playing with another blue petal. Turning on the lights, I could see more of them, over a dozen dry blue petals lining the edge of the wall. Finally, I could tell I wasn't going crazy. This wasn't a one-time deal. That was real. Marmalade didn't seem to mind, though. I'm gonna have to get back to you, I told Deirdre. Something came up. As the call ended, I started scooping up the petals by hand. The moment my knees hit the floor, there was a power surge. It was all so quick. A flash of black. Marmalade hissed, looking straight past me, and I could hear a rustling noise, like a large animal moving through a bush. As quick as it had come, it went, leaving only a startled cat and my elevated pulse behind. The lights were slapped back on with a click, blinding me. Marmalade retreated to behind the couch while I picked up the rest of the petals. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the many patterns, petals in hand. I could imagine the gray sinking deeper and deeper, showing me something past the obvious. Like one of those images you have to look at cross-eyed to see the truth. I had the same sensation, like I was missing something obvious. I could imagine hearing things deep in an imagined forest. I could hear branches snapping. I could imagine the blue flowers swaying in the wind. And somewhere in all that depthless dark, something roamed. Something looking for an exit. At some point, I snapped to attention. There was a loud electronic noise. An alarm. It was already morning. For some alien reason, I'd been stuck there for hours, just staring at the hypnotizing patterns. An entire night's rest, gone. It wasn't until I stepped away that I realized just how exhausted I really was. My legs had locked on place, keeling me over straight to the stone-tiled living room floor. Marmalade rushed over, worried about this sudden development. I spent a few minutes just sitting there, calming myself down. The ringing from my cell phone was going strong, trying to give me enough time to shower before my first morning meeting. And yet, I just sat there, slowly petting my cat. My eyes bobbing in and out of sleep, my body deprived. Where'd I been all night? What had I seen? I barely made it through that day. having a 45-minute nap over lunch. By the time I finished my last interview, I was a shell of my old self, barely conscious. I filled Marmalade's food and water bowl and crawled into bed with all my clothes still on. The moment my eyes closed, I could hear something in the distance. In the half-world between sleeping and waking, I heard breaking branches, owls taking flight, and something large approaching. And despite I knowing I was well and truly alone, my body screamed at me to wake, to have one more look just in case. I did. I forced my eyes open. Something sharp scratched against the stone-tiled floor, something retreating in haste. A trail of dry petals leading right up to the side of my bed. After a night of dreamless sleep, I woke up to choking on something. It took me almost a full minute to cough up a blue petal, several of which had been sprinkled throughout my bed. I could have sworn the wallpaper looked a bit lighter, as if several flowers were looking sparse. The whole wall looked a bit darker. That morning, I'd had enough. I called in sick and brought out my toolbox. I started scraping off the wallpaper, piece by piece, across the entire apartment. I made a day of it, listening to music as Marmalade looked at me curiously. Every illustrated petal and stem dropped to the floor, cut by cut, like trimming a paper garden. By the end of the day, my wall was laid bare, revealing nothing but black lead-painted concrete underneath. That night, after a long shower, I went to sleep with wallpaper remains still lining the edge of the room. Finally, I could focus. I could look past the hypnotizing patterns. It was done. Gone. Over. Except it wasn't. As I went to sleep, my eyes drifted to the barren walls. A black, eternal night, now unhindered by what little paper-thin barrier had been erected. Just looking at it gave me that feeling in my stomach, like I was falling forward. Even closing my eyes felt brighter than staring into it. Like it was more than a color, a place. At some point in the night, I heard this loud yowl. Looking up, I could see Marmalade sitting at the edge of my bed, staring straight at the wall, hissing and raising her hackles. Looking straight ahead, I saw something. There, deep in the dark of the bare wall, something moved. I swooped up Marmalade, who clung to my shoulder like a parrot. I threw on my pants, shirt, and got my bag. I'd had enough. I wasn't about to stick around to find out the depths of what was either my own insanity or something unnatural entirely. I didn't want to know. As I entered the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. Every single wall had turned a midnight black. The windows had fogged up from the inside, blocking the moonlight from peeking in. I ran my hand along the wall, looking for the door. Something cold bumped against the palm of my hand. A finger. I recoiled, almost dropping Marmalade in surprise. I couldn't see my door. As I looked around, trying to find my bearings, I slowly came to the realization that nothing was quite as it should. The kitchenette was further away. The windows were further apart. The proportions of the room were off, and seemingly shifting every time I blinked. It was as if everything in that darkness was untrue, malleable, subtly shifting as soon as I looked away. And so was I. Looking down at my hands, they'd seem different with every blink of my eye. They could be older, younger, scarred, masculine. It was impossible to tell. It was just diffuse enough for an anxious mind to fill in the blanks, but it felt like more than that. It wasn't just a fear of the dark. It was the dark changing me. Finally, I fumbled my way to the front door and pulled it open. And there was nothing. Just a solid black nothing. The apartment was getting darker. Even the windows were turning black. The kitchen sink was running, pushing forth dark, nondescript globs, all of which had this peculiar chemical smell. Ammonia? Marmalade was freaking out. She clung to me, digging her claws into my shirt, hissing at something in the dark. Whenever I turned around, the room would look different, swallowed further and further by the night. I could see vague silhouettes, hands reaching forward. Some small, some impossibly large. I could imagine creatures the size of skyscrapers towering forward. Impish little beasts nipping at my heels. I curled into a ball on the floor, clutching Marmalade close to my chest. Together, we stared down anything and everything creeping closer. But I was losing. My light was dying. It was all going dark. Then I felt a rumble. I'd forgotten my phone was still in my pants. Bringing it out, I had a new message from Deirdre. The little screen lighting up a little bubble around me. I wasn't even on the floor anymore. I was sitting on a pile of dry grass and blue petals, and I could see the edge of a dead field stretching out around me in all directions. A wind cut through me like cold glass. And there really were things moving out there. Some big, some small, all vague and horrifying, waiting for me to look away long enough to take shape.
Hey, hun. I heard you were feeling under the weather, so I just wanted to check in. Get plenty of rest. We'll talk soon.
I played it again and again. I filled my head with her voice and my eyes with what little light the phone struggled to provide. I could feel Marmalade's pulse beating against my neck. Something would brush against me. A light kick against my foot. Footsteps rushing past. I saw nothing, but they were there. Hidden in the dark.
We'll talk soon.
Deirdre's message repeated for the 10th time.
We'll talk soon. We'll talk soon.
I don't know how long I sat there, just waiting for the dark to pass. But nothing came of it. The battery was dying. As it reached the final few percentages of power, there was little left for me to do. The light was shrinking. I couldn't hear Deirdre's message anymore. Marmalade was yowling like crazy, hissing and striking at something unseen. As the screen died, I felt the chill of the world descend on me. In the silence, and I could feel something approaching. Something careful and calculated. I couldn't see if, but I could feel it. Smiling at me. Leering. Eager. I was panicking. My skin felt like ice, and I couldn't feel my fingers. I held Marmalade close to me, and in a last-ditch effort, I flung my phone into the dark. Glass shattered. I'd thrown it through the window next to the little French balcony. A beam of morning light broke through. I turned around to an empty apartment. The layout exactly as I'd remembered it. The kitchenette still running. Torn down wallpaper lining the edges of the room. Marmalade's favorite bed still by the window, and the many Chinese takeout boxes still left unattended. Just as it should be. Except every inch of the room was covered in dry, blue flower petals. Needless to say, I didn't stick around for long. I moved out to the branch office where Deirdre worked and ended up staying there. We're still best of friends to this day. I haven't been able to talk to a lot of people about what happened that night. I get the sense that whatever lived in that dark space was just waiting for someone to tear down that barrier. That hedge of flowers and patterns. Something waiting to pull me into a dark place. Never to return. Poor Marmalade hasn't been the same ever since. Her fur has turned a matted orange, and she's a lot clingier than before. She's okay, though. She's a happy cat. But it'd be a lie to say she hasn't changed. The same can be said about me. It isn't a single obvious thing, but I feel like there are things about me that aren't that same. My eyes look darker. My fingers longer. My teeth sharper and whiter. Just enough for me to notice and remember. In my new place, I sleep with the lights on. I try not to look too closely at the wallpaper.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a therapist finds himself in over his head when he gets an appointment from a woman with ties to the supernatural. So, do you trust strangers? Because she simply couldn't tell a lie.
When I met Dawn Anderson, I didn't know what to think. She'd booked a counseling session, seemingly out of the blue, and I had no prior information about her. She'd just called into the office, booked a session with my assistant, and popped up. It was a pale November Thursday and my final session for the day. The streetlight outside was in an awkward position, casting long shadows across my office. As I closed the blinds, Dawn shifted in her seat.
I've sought help before,
she admitted.
but I always get the impression that no one really listens.
Therapy is often misunderstood, I said. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It is just maintenance. Like taking a shower or doing your dishes.
I haven't done my dishes in weeks.
She laughed. A darkness fell over her face as she hit herself upside the head repeatedly. Her curly brown hair swayed with each smack.
No,
She said.
I have done my dishes. It's fine. I was exaggerating. I'm not lying.
No worries, I said, sitting down across from her. Let's just have a chat and get to know each other.
That sounds good.
She nodded, calming down.
Thank you.
Dawn was born in '93 as the only child of Morgan and Lita Anderson of Tomskog, Minnesota. Dawn seemed a bit distant when talking about her childhood, as if repeating something she'd rehearsed.
They were very strict and distant. Sometimes they didn't seem like parents at all.
She said.
They had their moments, but there was no warmth.
She would go on to tell stories about how they beat her if they thought she was telling a lie. They once withheld food for 3 days because she didn't tell them what she'd done at school that day. Withholding information, they argued, was a form of lying. They did do nice things at times. They'd often take her swimming down at Frog Lake, and they always made sure her room had plenty of flowers and toys.
It was strange, though.
She admitted.
Going swimming was almost a chore. Twice a week, rain or shine.
When it was too cold to go swimming, they'd give her a mud bath, where she was thoroughly scrubbed.
It became routine, right down to rubbing my gums with it.
It was almost as if Dawn brushed it aside. To her, childhood and parenting wasn't important. She seemed more urgently distressed. And as she recounted her past, she would often stop to make sure she was remembering it right. Apparently, it was very important for her to be as accurate as possible, a remnant from her strict upbringing.
But I'm not here to talk about what used to be.
She said.
I'm here to talk about here and now.
All right, I nodded. Let's talk about it. Who are you today?
I'm a liar.
She sighed.
I've started telling lies.
I waited for her to add something to it, but that was it. That was her big reveal. I leaned back in my chair, clutching my notebook. Does it happen often? I asked.
Not really.
She shrugged.
Every now and then. But it really bothers me.
People tell little lies all the time, Dawn. That doesn't make them bad people.
They don't tell them like I do.
We locked eyes, and I could tell she was sincere. This was something that truly bothered her. For her, this was like admitting a murder.
My lies are different from others.
She continued.
I don't know how to explain it. They change things.
Most lies do, I said. They change our perception. They manipulate.
Yes, but they only manipulate people.
She complained.
Lies don't change what really happens.
What do you mean, Dawn? She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She took a deep breath and touched a curly strand of her brown hair for comfort. Meeting my eyes, she spoke in a low tone of voice.
The streetlight outside broke the moment you closed the blinds.
I looked back at the window. Strange how I hadn't noticed it. That awkward light would shine right into my patient's eyes. But it had gone dark. Very observant, I said. I didn't even notice.
That's because I lied.
She said.
It just seems true, but it isn't. That light worked just fine up until I said it didn't.
So you turned it off? I asked. With your lies?
Yes.
She was dead serious. I got up from my chair and peeked out the window. Just as she said, the light was completely broken. It was strange how I hadn't noticed it earlier. But sometimes you can get so caught up in routine that you don't notice the obvious. As I sat back down, she looked defeated.
That's the thing.
She sighed.
It is really hard to convince people that I'm telling the truth. That things change based on my lies.
How would that work exactly? I asked.
I don't know.
Dawn said.
But I didn't have an appointment when I came here today. I lied about it, and then suddenly I had one.
That's not right. I smiled. We had a call in last Tuesday. We got your number and everything. I held up my cell phone, showing her the booking receipt. There it is.
I change things.
Dawn insisted.
What I say changes things. It changes what has happened to accommodate for my lies.
So, when did this start, Dawn?
I think it has always been like this,
she said.
I think my parents knew. Maybe that's why they taught me never to lie.
But you started lying anyway, I said. Can you remember something recent?
There have been a few accidents.
Dawn said.
I used to have a friend who went to veterinary school, and an acquaintance who worked for a bank. We'd been out of touch for a few years, and when we met up, I got them mixed up. I was so convinced that the person who I talked to had gone to veterinary school.
But they didn't?
No. They worked at a bank, I'm sure of it. But now they had both gone to veterinary school. They couldn't have.
Memory is a fragile thing, I said. What is most likely? That you misremembered something, or that your misunderstanding changed events that have already happened?
I know what you want me to answer, but the proof is overwhelming.
So, why did you come here today, Dawn?
I want to stop lying. I never want to tell a lie again.
She breathed a sigh of relief. I nodded, making notes in my notebook. What is stopping you, I asked. What stops you from being completely honest?
Honestly, it is addicting.
She said.
Once you start, it is hard to stop.
How so?
I don't think you understand. The possibilities are staggering. It's like, if you could win the lottery by snapping your fingers, what would stop you from just snapping your fingers all day?
Getting a sore thumb, I suppose.
That's what it feels like to me.
She said.
It's like having a sore thumb in my mind. Every lie I tell is just, it takes something away.
Life is full of little inconveniences, I said. I don't think you should punish yourself for finding ways to cope.
It is not just coping, and it is not just punishing myself. It just happens, like using a muscle too much. It aches. It hurts.
Is that why you hit yourself on the side of your head when we started talking?
Yeah,
She nodded.
it distracts from the pain inside.
Well, some of the things you're describing are impossible, Dawn. You can't change the past. I can see why you would like to, given the way you were raised, but it just can't be done,
I'm gonna stop you right there.
said Dawn, holding up her hand.
Tell me something you did this morning.
All right, I put on fresh white socks.
Then why don't you have any socks on?
As soon as I said it, I felt like an idiot. I'd stepped in a water puddle as I got to work and didn't have a spare pair with me. My wet socks were still hanging on the bathroom radiator. You didn't let me finish, I smiled. I do have them, just not on me right now.
No, see? It changes. It changes, and you just adapt to it.
She knocked herself on the side of her head, clenching her eyes shut. Sparkles of sweat ran down her forehead. Dawn, look at it from my point of view. What is more likely? That you saw I wasn't wearing socks and used that information, or that you can change the very fabric of events?
I know how it sounds, but that's what happens. And as long as it is just small things, all I get is a crackle in the back of my head. But as soon as I start telling big lies, it feels like I'm being ripped apart.
With big lies, do you mean something we can't ignore? Do you have any examples?
The first lie I ever told.
She nodded.
I had this dream of sunflowers when I was a kid. A whole field of them, all swaying in the wind. When I got to school, I drew them on a piece of paper. The yellow crayon was taken, so instead I colored them blue.
That sounds lovely.
It was, until I got home. Our entire backyard was this large field of blue sunflowers. My parents, of course, acted like it had always been there.
But it hadn't been.
No, Mom had a garden there. She grew tomatoes. We still had some in the fridge, but she insisted they were store-bought.
So they never found out you were lying?
Not at first, but I felt so bad that I admitted it. That's when I didn't get to eat for 3 days. They said it was because I hadn't told them about the drawing soon enough.
Well, I think you will find it difficult to convince me this is true, Dawn. But that is irrelevant. It is true to you, and that's what is most important. If you want to stop lying, there are ways to do so. But I'd like to get to the root of the problem and see where this comes from.
It bothers me that you don't believe me.
I'm sorry to hear that, Dawn. But what you're describing is simply impossible.
It bothers me greatly.
We looked at one another. Dawn wasn't budging, but neither was I.
How come you've pretended to write all this time when your pen has run out of ink?
It's just to put the patient at ease, I smiled, like a doctor with a stethoscope. It is expected, but not always practical.
The last 40 pages you've written is just the text, "Listen to Dawn," over and over.
Of course it is, I chuckled. That's how I practice my cursive.
And you don't see anything odd about this? Nothing at all?
Coincidences happen, but all that you point out are things I can clearly remember. I can't be surprised by a stated fact.
But that's just... ugh.
Dawn wiped her nose as a single drop of blood dripped out. I offered her a napkin, but she refused. This was clearly affecting her.
I've talked to 8 other people about this.
She said,
No matter what, they keep denying me. No matter what absurd proof I present, all they do is rationalize it and call me schizophrenic.
I don't think you are, Dawn. I think you have a trauma to...
It is not a fucking trauma.
Dawn stood up, pacing back and forth. She was getting agitated. I stood up next to her, carefully putting my hand on her shoulder. Can I get you any coffee, tea?
You're married, right?
She asked.
Do you love your wife?
Of course, with all my heart.
Do you, though? Do you really, really love her?
Undoubtedly. Dawn shook her head.
Can you feel right now the happiness she brings to your life?
Yes, but what...
Then why are you considering divorcing her?
It was like the twist of a knife in my chest. It was such an alien thought, but of course, I had been considering it for a long time. I couldn't think of a reason at the top of my head, and the way it made me feel was just awful. Patricia and I had had our ups and downs over the years, but we'd always grown stronger because of it. Sure, we'd hit a rough patch in the past few weeks, but...
You said you loved her.
Said Dawn.
You said you were happily married, then something changed.
Not changed as much as... I scratched my head. I felt strange, like something had flipped my world upside down. 2 drops of blood pushed themselves out of Dawn's eyes, little red tears.
You have to believe me.
Said Dawn.
Please believe me.
I'm trying, but...
Fine, let's go.
Growled Dawn.
Let's fucking go.
She put on her jacket and pushed me down into my chair. She was getting aggressive, and I considered calling for security. Then, as soon as I sat down, she sat down across from me. She took a hold of my hand and didn't let go.
Remember last night when you stabbed your wife?
She asked. How the fuck did she know? My mouth opened wide like a fucking trout as my mind started to race. There'd been no one else there. It had been an accident, a fluke. We had talked about our thoughts of a divorce, but it was nothing serious. Then it just escalated.
You buried her in the backyard. Your hands still smell like dirt. What do you think about that?
She continued. No, you can't. I could feel my body shutting down. Some sort of shock factor coursing through my brain. My hands started shaking, my eyes started tearing. I remembered it all so vividly. Patricia's soft hands covered by dirt, shovel after shovel. The way I scrubbed my hands, but couldn't get rid of the smell. I still had dirt under my fingernails. It had happened, but I'd tried to push it away. To pretend like nothing, an alibi.
Why would you do that? You loved her, didn't you?
I did. I'd loved Patricia with every bone of my being.
And yet you kept her head in a plastic wrap in the back of your goddamn freezer.
Of course. I couldn't let her go. I broke down. I cried like a fucking baby. There was no way Dawn could have known this. I had barely even admitted it to myself. Compartmentalizing. There were 1,000 little reasons leading up to what I'd done. But to have it all splayed out like this in front of me, it was too much. My world was crumbling. My peace of mind had already rested on the knife's edge, ready to tip me over the side, but now I felt like I was free-falling. A pale hand feeding the worms outside. A bathroom smelling of chlorine and bleach. A perfectly good hacksaw that I couldn't bear to look at ever again. Green eyes staring at me through thin plastic, asking me why. I threw myself out of the chair, enraged. She couldn't know. Dawn were suddenly bleeding out of her mouth, eyes, and nose. Still, she smiled.
Every time.
She laughed.
Why does no one ever listen?
You've said enough.
Really?
Dawn pushed me away, breaking a leg of the table between us. As I landed on my back, she held me down with the hat rack.
You drowned your daughter in a well. You ran over your mother with your car. You've killed 3 hitchhikers using the loaded rifle in the trunk of your car.
I just screamed as the memories came flooding back to me. It was true. All of it. How the fuck did she know? It had been years. I'd covered my tracks so well. I got a hold of her foot and dragged her down to the floor next to me. I could barely see her in between my teary eyes, but I had to do something. I had to stop the pain. I had to end her. I tried to get my hands around her neck, but she resisted. She was stronger than I thought.
Then again,
She coughed as one of my hands touched her neck.
all I've said today has been a lie, hasn't it?
My mind went completely blank. As my eyes lost focus, I saw Dawn getting up. Her eyes were completely red swollen with blood. She kept beating the side of her head with the palm of her hand, coughing all the while. I'd probably given her a bruise. It was, but
It takes a while to rationalize the bigger stuff.
she said
Give it some time.
I didn't do any of that. I didn't.
Of course not. All I said was a lie.
But why, how,
I think that's enough.
sighed Dawn.
I can't say I'm surprised. No one ever believes me. Just try to remember me as Dawn Anderson, a young human woman, and not the way you've truly seen me.
As she left the office, I was still sitting on the floor. I couldn't even understand why. I had no reason to be upset or attack her. Sure, she'd been provoking me with mental images of harm coming to my family, but to attack her like that, it was insanity. Stress-induced hysteria or something. I sat alone in my office, feeling the pale light of the streetlight outside warm the back of my neck. I don't know what to believe. And I don't know if I will eventually rationalize all of this to some insane degree. But I know that it shook me to my core. There was something about Dawn that I had never seen in another patient. And to some degree, I believe she knows something impossible. And when I went home to open my freezer that night, I was genuinely scared to see something look back at me, even though Patricia was sleeping soundly in the other room. But the shock of hearing what Dawn had said, and the images it conjured in my mind, it remained. The untouched spot in my backyard, the hacksaw in the garage. It was still there, unused. I held Patricia tight that night as I dreamt of murder, as if it had really happened, if only for a while.
Not too long ago, I saw a viral video compilation of thieves in low-income areas. People filling up baskets with items and walking out the door, breaking windows, threatening cashiers, that kind of stuff. But one of the 3-second clips in the compilation was something different. In the clip, we can see a group of people walking over a broken glass door, slowly marching. It looks like a riot, but there's more to it. I was there, and I want to tell the whole story. This happened a few years ago. Before heading off to college, I wanted to save up some extra money. I used to live in a pretty shitty neighborhood, and there were only 2 options for a side gig. One was at the local bar, and the other was at a convenience store. I applied at the convenience store, had a quick interview with the manager, and started the following Monday. Now I gotta stress just how run down this place was. This was the kind of place where the same homeless man sits outside every day, all day, where there were no baskets to carry stuff in. They'd been stolen too many times. There were a dozen signs taped to the door with a dozen little rules, all to prevent the various grifts and thefts that had been attempted over the years. No bags, no backpacks, no plastic bags, no canvas bags, no carts, and of course no weapons. Still, despite its faults, it was the only place local folks could afford to shop at, and while there were some people who took advantage of it, a vast majority loved the place. Right down to the homeless guy chilling by the door. I was planning to be there for the summer. We had a morning and evening shift, and we changed who did what every 2 weeks. The video clip in question took place during my 4th week, my 2nd week at the evening shift. It was a Saturday evening. Benny, the homeless guy, was off to recycle some cans. The AC was acting up, leaving a thin layer of humidity on everything in the store, including me. I was working the counter. It was almost closing time, but I waited for Benny to get back before closing. The guy was harmless and survived on little to nothing. He usually spent what he'd earned during the day before closing time. I wasn't working alone. There was also Lonnie, a mother of 3 who wanted to get some extra money on the side while her husband was posted overseas. A woman in her mid-40s with this long black hair that could almost reach her knees. Every time I think of her, I'm reminded of oatmeal cookies. We were ready to close when a customer walked in. I was expecting Benny, so when I turned to see a complete stranger, I was a bit surprised. Now, we get new people all the time, but this one was unusual for a number of reasons. One, he was clearly not a local. The guy was wearing a brand-name blazer and custom-tailored pants. 2, he was in a hurry. He was clutching this brown canvas bag, panting like a tired dog. I didn't get the time to ask him to hand it over, as per the sign.
You got salt?
He asked what...
Mineral salt.
Yeah, go check. He was sprinting down the aisle before I had a chance to finish my sentence. Lonnie peeked out from the dairy aisle with a raised eyebrow. I shrugged. Moments later, there was some commotion. I went to check on the guy and saw that he'd pulled down 6 cans of salt on the floor, opened them, and drowned his bag in it. He was whining and pleading, repeating, "Come on, come on, come on," over and over. He was in distress, like his life depended on this. I didn't know what to do. I was going to call the police, but I wanted to de-escalate first. Still, I didn't want to talk to him. There was no telling what a guy in his state of mind might do. Instead, I stepped back, got my phone out, and talked to him as calmly as possible. "Sir, you can't do that in here," I said. "You need to pay and take this outside."
There's no time.
He said.
I can't. I'm sorry.
What happened next came out of nowhere. One moment, I was looking at this crazy guy covering the ground in salt. Next moment, pandemonium. Lanny screamed at me from the front counter. The lights began to flicker, then die, leaving the store in sudden darkness. Running up to the front counter, my jaw dropped. Lonnie had barely managed to close and lock the front door. There were at least 24 people outside, none of whom I recognized. These people were something else entirely. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them, but looking a little closer, you could see a few things were off. For example, there was a woman in a nightgown. She didn't even have shoes on. A little further back, there was a guy who looked like a political campaigner for a candidate I'd never heard of. And to the side was this really tall man who looked like a fancy sommelier, except the front of his shirt had been cut to shreds, like he'd been run over by a lawnmower. These people were gathering around the storefront, poking and prodding for a way in. One of them smacked their hand flat on the glass. Lonnie was already calling the police. The store had security cameras once, but they had long since been wrecked. We just had these camera-looking things that were basically just a red light. It was mostly a deterrent rather than something functional, so there was no way for me to check how many people were really out there. Still, there were more than a few. I didn't even know that one of the front cameras actually worked, providing the clip in question later on. The strange man with the canvas bag was on his knees crying, like full-on wailing like a scared kid. It was eerie to see someone just break down like that. It's at that point you start to realize how serious something really is. We had managed to lock ourselves in. Lonnie was on the phone, trying to get the police to hurry. It wasn't easy to get them to come by this neighborhood. Apparently, it was viewed as a bit of a lost cause. They advised her to get out of there and let our insurance company deal with it. The fact that these people showed up out of nowhere didn't seem to bother them, and the fact that our lives were in danger was described as exaggerating. I have this one vivid memory of the beginning of that night. There was this neon sign for a bar across the road, and that was the only light that came through. All these strange people, backlit by this eerie red and blue. It was eerie. There was no way to tell what was going to happen next. Were they there for us? For the store? For the strange man? While Lonnie kept calling for help, I turned my attention to the stranger. He'd slumped down against one of the shelves and gone catatonic. He just sat there, staring at the bag. I pushed against his shoulder a bit, and he didn't seem to notice. I decided to check the bag. This too garnered no response. The bag contained a sort of metal thermos, a silvery gray container that had burst open. There was a navy blue liquid covering the inside of the bag, now drenched in salt. It had this faint smell of ammonia and had begun to harden into a gel. I did my best not to touch it.
It's too late.
The man whispered.
It's too late. It doesn't matter anymore.
What? I yelled. What doesn't matter? Who are you? He waved his head back and forth as if bobbing for an answer, but no words came to mind. He shook his head and sunk his face back into his hands. I tried to push him to answer, but he was just broken. There was no point in talking to him, and judging by the sounds coming from our storage, I didn't have time to stand around. I could hear Lonnie yelling at an emergency responder. I could hear a repeated metal clanking out back, like someone was beating the back door with a steel pipe. Then a grinding metal noise. It took me a moment to realize that they were moving the trash container out back, probably to get up on the roof. I rushed back to Lanny, who was hanging up the phone and trying again, desperate to get someone on the line who was ready to actually listen. I think they're on the roof, I stuttered. I think they're climbing.
Shit.
She sniffled.
Shit.
She took me by the arm and led me to the back storage. There, she pointed to a frail metal ladder leading to a yellow hatch in the ceiling, about 12 feet up.
Make sure it's locked. Block it with something.
With what?
I don't know.
She stormed back out a second later. I grabbed a metal pipe from a vacuum cleaner and painstakingly made my way up the ladder. I managed to lock the hatch and jam the pipe between two handles. It wasn't very stable, but it would hold for a bit. It was probably some kind of rooftop maintenance hatch, most likely for ventilation purposes. The thing hadn't been opened in years. The rust on the metal rungs testified to that. As I was about to climb back down, I stopped. I looked back up. While the hatch was shut, I could tell there was something up there. There was this low huffing noise coming from it. Someone was pressing their face against the other side of the hatch, breathing against it. Out of some morbid curiosity, I crept a little closer. "What do you want?" I spat. "What the hell do you want?"
Home.
Something mumbled.
Go home.
It was such an eerie noise, like someone belching the words rather than speaking them. Like an involuntary, painful reaction. More seizure than speech. Home. Go home. Then a crash. I hurried down the ladder, rushing towards the front door. This was the scene shown in the clip. A few seconds that we got from the only security camera that intermittently worked. They had broken through the door and were slowly stepping inside. They didn't seem to be in a hurry. If anything, they seemed exhausted. For a second, Lanny and I just held our breaths. There was no way to tell what was going to happen. Finally, a man with a crowbar stepped forward. He looked at us and belched up something dark that covered his chest. Then, as if nothing happened, he walked right past us. The others followed. They were heading for the aisle with the strange man and the canvas bag. Lonnie had given up on calling for help and had resorted to filming instead. It was helpless, but the only thing we could do. We couldn't fight these people. We were outnumbered 10 to 1. I considered pushing past them and just running into the night, but I didn't want to go near them. There was no telling what would happen if you provoked them. These weren't ordinary people. I can't tell you what was wrong, but I can tell you something was. What happened next, you can't see in the clip. 24 people descended on that aisle, picking up that canvas bag and tearing it apart. They were rubbing the contents of the broken thermos thing over themselves, climbing over one another to get every little drop of it. It looked like a goddamn snake pit of arms, heads and legs. People just devolving into careless meat, completely devoid of conscious thought. Animals. Meanwhile, the strange man was just sitting there, catatonic. As the bag was torn to pieces, a handful of the intruders sort of flopped over. They lay flat on their back, letting their legs and feet curl into something resembling dead branches. Others were making these excruciating, hungry, whining noises, desperately weeping at the empty bag. Then they turned their attention to the stranger. One of them clawed at his leg. He shook them off. Then another did the same.
No.
He said.
No.
It was this weak little grunt, like the man was fighting himself to realize what was about to happen. Lonnie and I shared a terrified look.
The fire extinguisher.
Lonnie whispered.
Get the fire extinguisher.
It was across the store, As soon as I turned my back on them, I heard the strange man's groaning no grow more desperate. It went from a mumble to an angry yell to a desperate plea. Then it was just screaming, blood-curdling screaming, gaining and losing in strength. I got the fire extinguisher and ran back towards the aisle, meeting Lanny halfway. She had this haunted look on her face and shook her head. She couldn't close her mouth, like her face was stuck in a panicked, silent scream. She covered her mouth with her hands, shaking like dry leaves.
Oh my god.
She huffed.
Oh my fucking god.
I didn't see much. There was blood, but like thick blood. Chunks of it. Tufts of hair. Pieces of a torn shirt. Bone. A couple intruders were rolling around the bloodied floor like it was catnip. Others were slowly getting up, disillusioned and desperate. One older man, covered mouth to toe in dripping blood, pointed a shaking finger at me and Lanny.
Them?
He coughed.
Maybe them?
Then they came for us. I didn't realize what was about to happen until they smiled. They clung to this primal hope that we, somehow, had something they needed. Lonnie snapped me out of it, dragging me into the back storage. She fumbled the keys and locked the double doors while I used a broom handle to bar them. There were still banging metal noises coming from both the ceiling hatch and the back door. Then a voice, one.
Them!
It wheezed.
Them!
And from the back door, another voice parroted it. Like a rising storm, the word swept over the invaders, until we heard it everywhere. Them. We made our way to the lunchroom before I heard the broom handle crack. They were through the storage doors. Lanny was desperately dialing her phone, while I locked us in the lunchroom, a tiny room with a shared bathroom, a window and a couple of lockers. I could hear wet skin slap against the window, but I couldn't see what it was. The curtains were drawn.
Fucking yes.
Lonnie cried into her phone.
Yes, it's me again. They're getting in, they're...
The window broke. Before I even saw someone, I pulled the safety pin from the extinguisher and blasted it. Laney fled into the bathroom, locking it behind her. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Someone was crawling through the broken glass of the window. I could see the rough stains of blood against the powdered white. The lunchroom door buckled. I could hear flesh hit concrete as the hatch in the storage broke outside. Someone fell through. It sounded like a hard boot coming down on a wet cabbage. They were breaking through, slowly but surely, all to the sound of a rhythmic them. I swung a locker open, but realized there was no way I could hide in there. I couldn't go for the window. I couldn't push past the doors. This was it. It was it. To this day, I lay awake thinking about what I felt in that moment. That ice-cold primal panic. Forgetting to breathe. Feeling your tongue drying up as your airways open up. Preparing for a death scream. Then Lonnie pulled me into the bathroom. It was tiny. It was meant for, at best, one average-sized person. I fell backwards, landing with my back against the toilet. Lonnie climbed over me to lock the door just as someone reached the handle. The door opened inwards, so I put up my legs and locked my knees. Lonnie fumbled around in the sink where she'd put her phone. Someone was still on the line, but I suspect all they could hear was our desperate screams and that ever-present mantra of them. The hinges were shaking. The metal handle rattled. I could count every nail on the door and see the minuscule movements as they slowly rolled out. In that moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat and how it slowly synced up to the monotonous chant of them. Looking back at it, my mind is just black. There's nothing there. It's like trying to remember a vague nightmare. Something that happened to an unreal version of yourself. And in those moments when you realize that you were there, the real you, then it spirals. And for a couple of skipped heartbeats, I'm back there, fighting for my life. I'm back with that chant, that banging on the door. At one point, the door buckled. Fingers poked through the gap, grabbing Lonnie's long black hair. They tore out a handful of it, like a full fist. Even in all that panic, I saw her scalp turning red. But we pushed back, and the door stayed shut just a little longer. It was still dark, but with every push against the door, and with every inch the door gave, little glimpses of moonlight came through like a sickening strobe light, but a little longer was all we needed. The final thing I heard them say was, "No, home, please, home." Then this combination of home, them, please, and no. The banging slowly stopped. My hearing went from that awful mantra to my own heartbeat, and then nothing. A light breeze, perhaps, a careful knock. Laney and I held our breaths.
Excuse me. Y'all doing all right in there?
Benny, the homeless guy. The coast was clear. Stepping out, there was no one but Benny left. The ground was covered in this black ash, stinking of ammonia and sulfur, but the attackers were gone. The place was a complete mess, every window and door broken. You could see traces in the ash where people had dragged their feet before they seemingly disappeared. Going back out into the store, there was no sign of the strange man. There was still blood spatter covering the side of the aisle, but now the ground was covered in that awful black ash. I stepped over the broken front door, past the trampled flowers and broken glass. I have this vivid memory of blue petals from a sunflower getting stuck to the side of my black work shoes as I went out into the night. Minutes later, the police showed up, and the rest is history. The whole event was categorized as a sort of riot. No suspect was arrested, and the strange man was never identified. From what I've heard, they never investigated anything as a murder or assault. For all intents and purposes, that night was just a strange break-in. So yeah, somehow that clip made its way into a random compilation online. I'm not sure how. Lonnie sent me the link. It's been a few years, but we still keep in touch. Not a lot, though. Seeing one another kind of reminds us about that night, and I think both of us just wants to forget. I guess what I want to say is that some things are different from what they seem. So think twice before you share something. Take a step back. Think.